Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody, wherever you are around the world, and welcome to our first Pioneer video. My name is Manuel, I'm your host. This time we talk about Bogles, also known as white-green hexproof, and I have the pleasure to have here in the new studio for the first time, Tobias Mead. Welcome.
Thank you very much for inviting me. It was a long time that we saw each other live on camera, and now in the new studio. Looks amazing, to be honest.
Oh, thank you very much. I put actually a lot of time and efforts to make it as good as possible. And yeah, I'm also very happy about it. And the last time we recorded, I think it was July 2018. So more than 1 year ago. Yeah.
That was a legacy video.
It was a legacy video, yes, absolutely. Totally correct. Yeah, it's about time. But now we are on a different territory. We're talking about Pioneer, this new format announced officially by Wizards of the Coast on October 21st, if I remember correctly. So it's been around for a little while. Still trying to understand, how things would settle down in the end, because we had the first banned and restricted announcement last Monday, as of the recording of this video.
Yeah, the dust still has to settle, definitely. Yeah. And it's quite an amazing time to play the format right now, because you can do about anything, you can face about anything, and that's like what's really fun about the format for me right now. It's like really fun when you have to explore like a new world, and that's amazing about Pioneer.
I totally agree with that. So let's start with the deck tech. Let's talk about Bogles in Pioneer. What is the game plan of this deck?
So the game plan of Bogles, if you play Modern or have seen Modern, you might know the Bogles deck from Modern, is to play Hexproof creatures and enhance these Hexproof creatures by enchantments, which give them certain bonuses so they can grow and become stronger than the creatures of your opponent, and then beat them to death pretty quickly.
Okay, let's talk about the different elements of the deck. I mean, creatures, enchantment. Let's break it down a bit. And I would start with the creatures. Yeah. So what is the function of these creatures that we have here in the deck?
First of all, you have Gladecover Scout, which is more or less your best creature in the deck. It's the functional reprint of Slippery Boggle, which is the namesake of the deck in Modern. So it has to be good, definitely, because it's a 1/1 for 1 with Hexproof. The same for Bizarro Archer, Hexproof as well, and has another power added, so it's 2/1 actually, and it has reach. The problem about Bizarro Archer, I would categorize it as the weakest creature in the deck, because it's rather slow. Normally you want to play your Boggle or your Gladecover Scout in this case on turn 1, so you can start attacking on turn 2 with enchantments already equipped on it. So Bizarro is a bit, on the slow side. It has some matchups where it shines, where they have a lot of flying creatures, naming Izzet Phoenix, for example. However, it's rather on the weak side. And then you have Strum. Strum's function in the deck is to reload your hand mainly, because it has this funny little line where it says, every time you cast an aura, you draw a card. What do you have in your deck? A lot of auras. And what your deck does is, I have a lot of cheap auras, so I will empty my hand quickly. I need to reload at some time. So drop a Strum, play some auras, reload, it's all fine.
That's the engine of your deck, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
This and Sixth Sense could be called the engine as well, but we will get to the auras later.
Okay, but maybe not so late in the end, because I have just a quick question about Barassa Tower Archer, and then we can just go for the enchantments.
Okay.
You said there is like the weakest creature in the deck, but I imagine is at the moment with the pool that we have in Pioneer, like the second best choice for hexproof creatures. There's no other replacement, and we can use?
There are some other replacements, but they're all not like too convincing. So it's the second best from the hexproof creatures.
Okay,
that we can say for sure.
Okay, just to clarify why it's there.
So if you take a look at other Bogles players lists, everyone plays them. Not everyone plays Strum, because some of them play that enchantment I forgot about, which lets you scry every time you play an aura. But I prefer to play Strum because I prefer drawing cards. You know, I'm a blue player in my heart. And even though this is not a blue deck, who doesn't love drawing cards?
Sure. Card advantage, always good in Magic. All right, let's talk about the enchantments then. We have quite a ton. So I don't really want to go through each single one of them about what they do, but rather how would you use them? Is there like a specific sequence that you would go for? Ideally, of course, when you have your starting hand with several enchantments.
It depends a bit on the matchup. What you normally want to add first to your hexproof creatures is if you can attack uncontestedly, so the opponent has no creature out, you want to start with Sixth Sense, for example. Because Sixth Sense says, well, every time this creature deals damage to the opponent, you can draw a card. So you can add like all the power, toughness, and nifty keywords later. Drawing cards every time you can is totally fine. Then what is always something you could do first is like adding the Cartouche of Solidarity. Because the Cartouche of Solidarity does something, it adds another creature to the board. Well, we don't have much creatures in our deck. We just have the 12 creatures you mentioned before. So having another creature out can come in handy at times, can be another target for auras. Although the creature isn't hexproof, it's just a 1/1 with vigilance. Totally fine to sometimes go that route and enchant that and make a big monster out of your vigilance token. Besides for that, it totally depends on the matchup. So for racing situations, what you usually want to have is like going to unflinching courage as fast as possible, because we talked about it earlier. You said, yeah, that's Armadillo Cloak. Yes, it is. And Armadillo Cloak was fantastic because, well, it tramples, it gives lifelink, and +2/+2. So it's a 3-for-1 in itself, more or less. And in racing matchups, this is ridiculous. Think about playing against like a red deck, for example, like a red burn deck, a prowess deck, whatever. One hit and they are out of the game. So
yeah,
it's like your biggest creature is attacking. It has trample. So even if they try like nifty tricks with blocking and like shooting their own creature, well, it doesn't matter. It has trample, and yeah, you get all the sweet life gain you want.
Yeah, that's really absolutely devastating for their game plan. Absolutely, you gain life and you also deal damage. Yeah. In these matchups, really shines. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. And the other category of enchantments which are pretty important are ethereal armor and all that glitters, because ethereal armor and all that glitters, what they add is raw power and toughness. And like in this deck, it can get extreme. For example, think about, which isn't like an unusual pattern of play. If you have like a turn 1 Gladecover Scout and enchant on turn 2, it's twice with ethereal armor, you attack with a 5/5 on turn 2, which is a reality smasher on turn 2.
Yeah, it's pretty big, absolutely.
Sounds like Legacy, doesn't it?
It does.
And in this deck, these enchantments get out of hand quickly because they multiply for every enchantment. Even if you play them later, it's nuts. So you can easily attack with 20 plus on turn 4. Happens sometimes.
Yeah, you can steal games fairly quickly.
Yeah, that's possible. Sometimes people tend to do like jump blocks to survive, but that means you're winning already, because if they have to waste creatures just to don't die, that's good for you.
It means you're already in a pretty good spot. Yeah, absolutely. Anything else you would like to say about the enchantments? We have several keywords actually linked to the different enchantments. So you mentioned before the no Armadillo Cloak, but the new ones on Unflinching Courage, Lifelink and Trample. Flying, I guess, is also pretty important.
Yeah, that's Griffspoon. The important thing about Griffspoon is you can replay it from your graveyard. Because at times when you're playing against sweeper decks, or if they have a way to like make a surprise block with, I don't know, the Blue Gear Hulk or stuff like that, because it's pretty hard to interact with your creatures, but sometimes they can, and sometimes your creatures die. That happens. And you can just reload that from the graveyard, especially with Strum. That's a fine way to get started after like you get wiped out of the game, and that's something where you can rebuild. And the other card of note is Cartouche of Strength. This is so notable because that's more or less your only interaction spell in the main deck. Because what Cartouche does, well, it adds trample, +1/+1, and the most important factor is it lets you fight with one of your creatures with one of the opponent's creatures. And sometimes, normally when it's creature combat, you're pretty favored in itself, but sometimes there are creatures with odd abilities you don't want to have on the board, and that's good fighting them. Or what comes up pretty often is when you're in a racing situation, you have one creature with unflinching courage, but you're still pretty low. Fighting an opponent's creature lets you lifelink once, and attacking then after you fought the creature gets you lifelink again.
Yeah.
So it's double lifelink in one turn then.
Yeah. So there are several effects and interactions that chain one after the other. We could say more or less.
Yeah.
But yeah, and when most of the time when you play the cartouche of strength on a creature, the creature is already pretty big, so it's able to fight and win the fight against almost any threat, I would say. All right, there is something that we haven't talked about yet, and it's the mana base. So plenty of duels, a few basics, and the castle. So why this selection of lands?
So we are a 2-color deck. We need the duels for our colors, definitely, especially because, well, with Basara Tower Archer, we have a double green spell we want to play on turn 2, and most of the enchantments are white, so we want to have a lot of white as well, so we need a lot of duels to fulfill those mana requirements. So we have 12 duels in our deck, and the other six land spots are filled up with basics. However, one isn't a basic.
Yeah.
So we have 3 forests, 2 plains, and 1 castle Ardenvale. And the castle Ardenvale is like a plains, but in some matchups it has like the good function that you can just put creatures onto the board. Mostly these are grindy and control matchups where this comes in handy. And in control matchups, this is even like your best card to have, because especially if they have like a ton of sweepers and they can clean your board often or counter your creatures, Castle Ardenvale gets them eventually.
Okay, it's gonna get you in the end.
Yeah.
All right, any specific sequencing on how to play the duels, because we have like the check lands and the shock lands. Anything you would recommend?
What you have to be wary of is Fortified Village and Sun Petal Grove, because the rest is more or less straightforward. The Temple Garden is a shock land. Sometimes you don't want to shock yourself, but usually it doesn't matter if you shock yourself, because you're the aggressor normally, so don't care about it. And if you have Unflinching Courage in your hand, don't care about it anyway. But Sun Petal Grove, just check if you have basic types in play. So if you have either Temple Garden or Castle Ardenvale, Forest Plains in play, if you just have Fortified Village in play, your Sun Petal Grove comes into play tapped.
That's important to remember.
You have to be careful about this. And the other thing is, for Fortified Village to come into play untapped, you need a basic type on hand. So that's where you have to be careful about sequencing sometimes, but the rest is pretty straightforward.
All right. We do also have one instant in 4 copies, and we're talking about Once Upon a Time, this new card from Throne of Eldraine.
Yeah.
Why is it there?
It's because we want to cheat on lands, and we want to cheat a bit. We don't want to cheat on creatures, but we have to cheat on creatures because, as you know, we only have 12 creatures in our deck, so we need a creature in our hand to have a functional hand, more or less, because if you just have like lands and enchantments, it doesn't work. So this helps you either find your lands or your creatures. It helps you to keep more hands. That's like the main function. It's not so much about the second copy of Once Upon a Time, because sometimes you do that, but normally you have other stuff to do when you have the second copy or when the effect of playing a spell first is already gone. And it's one of the reasons why we can go down to 18 lands, because sometimes comes up pretty often. I tend to keep no landers with Once Upon a Time in my hand, because I know, okay, this hand is pretty good if I have 1 land, and it's insane if I get to the second land, and then you can gamble and keep a no-lander, because having 5 looks for a land is totally fine.
All right. Since you're talking about the hands, what to keep, what to start with, and let's talk a little bit more about this. When you play a game, how do you evaluate your 7? What do you keep and what do you ship straight away because it's not good enough?
So, as I said before, what you definitely need is a creature. It doesn't really matter which creature it is. Normally, it's the best if you have like a Glade Cover Scout, so you can go off on turn 2 or start going off on turn 2. Sometimes it's good to have a Strum in your starting hand, because it might be a matchup where it's a bit more grindy and you need like the card draw. And Strum especially shines in matchups where they have not so much removal. So if they don't really interact with your creatures, then it can be amazing. Problematic about it is that sometimes those decks tend to go over your deck in their game plan. So it's sometimes hard to choose between, do I want to have like the grindy creature, or do I want to have like the creature which goes straight for the face and smash them out of the game? So it's important to have a creature. It's important to have 1 or at least 2 lands. You don't need a lot of lands because your deck functions, if you take a look at the spells, well, your mana curve stops at 3, and you have only 2 different spells which cost 3 mana, which is the Unflinching Courage and the Cartouche of Strength, and those are like your that's like your late game.
Yeah, okay.
That's like topping off your creatures. So it's fine if you can play that late. That's totally fine. So having 2 lands, a creature, plus some auras, that's like the perfect hand you normally want. What I prefer is like having Gladecover Scout, Strum, 2 lands, and some auras. That's like the dream hand, more or less. So in an abstract.
Yeah, okay. That will be the ideal hand to start the game with.
Yeah.
Okay, since we've been talking about starting the game, sequence in the first turn, I guess, deploy a creature, then start pumping it. Are any particular, situations, maybe specific matchups in which you have to take like a little different approach, or is it always straightforward, the game plan you go for?
No, there are matchups where you definitely have to hold back at times. Especially when you know that there are sweepers in the opposing deck, then it's better to keep back some creatures or sometimes even keep back enchantments if they have like interaction, instant speed. So rather be cautious, keep it back, attack first, and maybe just let a turn pass. And because there are normally decks which don't attack you that much, they're like reactionary. So you can just attack with your like 2/2, 3/3, whatever, and see when they finally pull the trigger, and then you can slam the rest of your hand onto the board after they played their sweeper, and just cross your fingers and hope they don't have a second one.
Yeah, absolutely. So we know that the metagame is still not really defined, but could you mention some matchups in which you have to be like more careful and not really overextend?
As I said, when you know they have sweepers, so
any Golgari build, for instance, because of language?
Yeah, sometimes they play language. It's not really common that those Golgari builds or the Sultai builds have a lot of sweepers. Sometimes they have like a one-off language. Against language, you always can play around by adding a certain toughness to your creatures because, well, language does only -4/-4. So if they are above 4 toughness, that's totally fine for you. And you're out of the woods, more or less. Another matchup where you have to be cautious is in sideboarded games against red decks. Because they can have like these instant speed, 2 damage sweepers. There are different versions of them. But sometimes they usually have like 1 or 2 copies in the sideboard. And you have to be careful because what happens a lot when you're not careful is like, okay, I'm going Gladecover Scout turn 1, going Bizarro Tower Archer turn 2, and then it's their turn 3, then they play that 3 mana, 2/2 damage spell, and, well, both your creatures are gone. And the problem is, when you play all your creatures and they die, and all the enchantments strand in your hand, well,
sure,
that's not the way, And then sometimes it's better to, like, okay, here it's actually better to not deploy the second creature, to maybe just start with the enchantments right now. So there are different play patterns according to the matchup, that's for sure. And what's also pretty interesting to note is when you're playing against those Golgari and Sultai decks, they have stuff like Abrupt Decay or Assassin's Trophy. They can interact with your enchantments.
Yeah,
most people can't, but they can. What happens often is, well, you have the Griff Spoon on one of your creatures. You try to attack because you guess, I can attack freely, and then they destroy your Griff Spoon, so they can block your creature.
Yeah.
You have to be careful of these situations so that you don't get blown out by them destroying one of your enchantments.
Okay, so red decks or red-based decks and Golgari decks, They have access to Assassin's Trophy, as you said, even Abrupt Decay, because Return to Ravnica is actually the first set that is allowed in Pioneer, time-wise, along with the timeline. So yeah, be careful about these. Being careful about these matchups, and play accordingly.
Yeah, same can be applied for white decks because white has sweepers as well, but they are not so prominent at the moment, so that's nothing to really think about. But just for the future, just be cautious when your opponent has sweepers in their deck. Just be careful about it if possible. Sometimes you have to jam and hope for the best, but if you can play around it, why not? Because normally these matchups are pretty good, because your angle of attack is pretty solid and blanks their way of reacting to creature decks pretty well, because they have a lot of spot removal, and spot removal does near naught to you.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about metagame in general. How is this deck positioned in the metagame, at least the current metagame?
Yeah, that's a two-edged sword, because before the bannings, it was okay, I would say. Now, I guess it gets better, but as we talked about it, it's still the Wild Wild West. Everything can happen in this kind of meta. And the reason I chose this deck in the beginning was it's pretty linear. It punishes people which are experimenting around at the moment, and it's really good against other creature decks. It just eats them up. It's really good against Oko decks, for example. It eats up these Oko decks normally, and that's why I like to play it. However, if you have decks going over the top, that's problematic. Decks which have a combo which can instantly kill you, like the Saheeli combo, which got banned. Not Saheeli, but the Felidar Guardian. But there are still decks like the Nexus decks, which can go over the top of you. They killed the Ramp deck, luckily, because that sometimes could have been problematic as well. Against the Ramp decks, your benefit was they didn't have much removal, so Shrum was, like always, a good choice, but the deck is dead as well at the moment. So 2 top contenders against you were killed by the banning, so I guess it's getting better at the moment. But you always have to be careful about if there are combo decks around which just go over the top and say, well, you can beat me down a bit and then I will just kill you. That's not good for you. You want to play against the fair decks especially.
Okay. So if you know your local Pioneer fellow players, you know what they're up to, it could be a very good choice playing Bogles if they are on fair and creature-based decks. That would be actually the best environment for you.
If they are fair and creature-based.
Yeah, if they're fair. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Before we close, I would like actually to ask you a little bit about the sideboard, even if we are still in the Wild West, as you like to say, but we still do have access to a sideboard, like 15 cards that we can use. So I'd like to know actually why this configuration of cards.
Leyline of Sanctity is mainly because, well, it's really good to have Leyline of Sanctity in your opening hand. That's why we have it 4 off in the sideboard. The number could be different. Sometimes I even think this card isn't really needed right now, because one of the only matchups where you really, really, really want it is like burn matchups. And you have to make a guess, is burn really a meta factor right now or not? So just check that. Dromoka's Command is really good in matchups where you want either another removal spell, because it can let you fight with another creature, where you have to get rid of enchantments, so you want to have your opponent sacrifice enchantments, or it's really good against red. It's amazing against red because you can prevent damage from a red spell. And so that's a really good card for these kind of matchups. Silk Wrap is a good card for creature matchups, especially where they pile on early creatures. Good thing about Silk Wrap is it stays in play and it fuels your ethereal armor and your all that glitters, because they still get the bonus from, there's an enchantment lying around.
True.
So your creatures grow. Same for Leyline of Sanctity. We talked about that already. Then we have the Voice of Resurgence, which is actually a creature. Voice of Resurgence is really good in matchups where you need to refill on creatures, or where your opponent plays a lot of instant speed in your turn. So they actually get punished for doing that.
Yeah.
So pretty easy. And Rest in Peace, Rest in Peace, you want to shut off the graveyard. You don't really rely on the graveyard except for Griff Spoon, flashback sometimes. It's not really called a flashback. I don't know what it's called, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, the ability to take it back to your hand, yeah.
Exactly. So Rest in Peace is just for graveyard matchups like Is It Phoenix, the Soul Flayer matchups, where they have like a Soul Flayer with different keywords in the graveyard, and you want to shut this off. And there's sometimes even like Dredge-like decks in Pioneer. You don't really have Dredge creatures. However, you have a lot of the payoffs, which are legal in Pioneer, so people are trying to play around with that. This can be useful at times then.
Okay, I think we said it all, so we can close the episode.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Tobias, for joining me here.
It was
After
a pleasure.
a long time.
And I guess now we have time to enjoy the magic.
Yeah, absolutely. And a big thank you to all of you for watching this video. We hope you enjoyed. Let us know your thoughts in the comment section below. And if you want to follow us on social media, you find all the information you need in the description of this video. What you can also do is subscribe to the channel and share this video, Twitter, Facebook, any other platform of your choice. It would be extremely appreciated, and it would also help us to keep on doing what we do. All right, everybody. Have a great time casting your favorite spells.
And take care, everyone.
Yeah, it's goodbye.